The section here has some less interesting plot lines, but they still exhibit the great character interactions that the story boasts. It just isn't as engaging or rewarding as the rest of the story, since the rest is so fantastic. The beginning reinforces that Melia is very much not a Homs. The Nopon refer to everyone else in this part as a Hom-Hom, and they refer to Melia as Bird Lady. The distinct difference should essentially confirm that Melia is not a Homs, yet the story continues to treat it like a secretive plot point that has yet to be revealed. After meeting Chief Dunga and gaining his blessing to go through Aerith Sea, Melia decides to stay, and Shulk talks to her. It seems a bit out of character for him, but it's only a minor gripe here since the writers justify it a scene later when Shulk states how he helps her because she was in his vision. Therefore, he thinks that she's important. And speaking of the next scene, it does a better job setting up the motivations for Melia and Shulk, albeit with a bit of awkward dialogue from Melia, like this line.
"This is my pledge to those that have died."
The line ignores Shulk's presence for a bit, and I think it ruins some of the good chemistry the scene otherwise establishes. Once the awkward dialogue has passed, the scene displays some great character chemistry between Melia and the rest of the cast. Chief Dunga also receives some characterization as an asshole, which is the main gimmick for all of the Nopon. Cute creatures who are all selfish cowards. Chief Dunga offers Riki, the legendary Nopon hero, to assist the party. His introduction serves a mostly comedic purpose, but all of the party members exhibit some more of their signature personalities, so I think it's fine. It also features the aforementioned Nopon gimmick when the background characters throw mushrooms at Riki. It works as a quick, effective way to depict the village's hatred for him, which is reinforced when the party has to buy Riki's own equipment. Despite the small amount of running around, it serves as good development. While the party leaves Frontier Village, a scene awkwardly begins where Riki states his motivation for fighting the Telethia, which is that he has to repay his debts. It's a decent motive, but it will seem less decent once he joins the party permanently, since he has the least personal incentive to fight the Mechon. In comparison to the other party members, who are all motivated by revenge, Riki's motives are rather lacking. The next set of cutscenes occur at the Decayed Forest when the party fight the Telethia. The start establishes some more world building about Ether, mostly reinforcing that Ether acts as a kind of energy, and the lack of energy leads to decay. I think the idea of Ether in the world is implemented wonderfully. Moving along, the next part isn't as good because it leans back into the Melia is definitely not a Homs, have you realized that yet? Plot point. The reintroduction of the plotline allows Sharla to explain how her powers work, which is good, but I wish they had removed almost all of the other parts where the story alludes to her true identity. If the writers removed almost all of the other hints, I think the reappearance in this scene would be warranted. After damaging the Telethia a small amount, a great scene finally happens. Melia begins to give up, and Shulk helps encourage her. But I think that's an oversimplification of the gravity for this scene. It sets up again how all the party members, except for Riki, join the party for revenge. The game doesn't vilify the main cast, however. Instead, they're humanized for desiring revenge. I think it's a great execution on the motif, since you'll find often that in revenge-centric narratives, the people who seek vengeance are violent and unjustified. But while Xenoblade depicts the consequences of vengeance later, it sets up the empathetic aspects of the vengeful characters much better than other narratives. Once the Telethia fight concludes, we're treated to another combat encounter, depicting the great coordination between all of the party, now including the new additions like Dunban and Melia. Melia has some closure for her dead friends, which ends that plotline on a satisfying note. The other thing to note here is the chemistry between Rein and Riki, which is one of the better relationships the writers develop for the Little Nopon. And once the party arrives back, Riki receives his forced motivation to continue with the party. Melia also says that she'll fulfill her promise all the way back from the beginning of Makna Forest, giving her a reason to continue with the party for a little while longer. After arriving at Apex Lake, the party transports to Aerith Sea, and there's a small scene with Lorithia in the Telethia laboratory. The shot is ambiguous enough not to reveal Lorithia's malicious intentions completely, but the small hint ensures that her loyalty to Zanza is developed and important to the game. One last thing I want to mention is the optional Monado art Shulk can unlock by completing the quest Mystery of Makna Ruins 4. The art is Monado Eater, and the kanji for the art is ta, as in the verb taberu, meaning to eat in Japanese. Except this form of the kanji has an extra radical on the leftmost side. For those of you who don't know what radicals are, it's the rectangle on the left. Despite the extra radical, the two kanji carry the same meaning. Once the party arrives at Earthsea, Rein comments on the strange ethereal appearance of the location, which marks the point where he begins to become the strictly comic relief character, but this only applies when the story doesn't decide to focus on his character development. So, this isn't necessarily a bad trait, only when the comedy falls flat. Shulk then informs Melia of what's happened to them and why they want to visit Prison Island, which is a quick way of ensuring that all the party members are informed. Shulk and company arrive at Alkamoth's entrance, where the game finally reveals proper to the party that Melia is of royalty. Now, the awkward, annoying plot point about Melia's identity is finally finished, right? Melia promises to still help Shulk and heads for the audience chamber. While she does so, a group of guards find the party and imprison them. Also, during Melia's arrival, we're introduced to Yumea, Tyrea, and Lorithia. They exude a vile aura based on their disdain for Melia, so they're automatically characterized as villains. While this bland malevolence is off-putting at first, there will be more development later, so I don't mind it for now. Melia's arrival at the capital introduces Saurian and Kallian, as well as Lorithia proper now. The conversation between Melia and Saurian establishes the father-daughter relationship between the two because of how proud he is here, though I don't think this relationship will receive as much development as it needed. Kallian informs Melia that her friends were arrested for wielding the Monado because of a Chosen One prophecy, where if the wielder of the Monado is black of heart, then it will mark the destruction of the High Entia. Usually, I would bemoan a prophecy like this, but what's interesting is that the prophecy does come true. Shulk's actions do lead to the destruction of the High Entia, and I absolutely love that. Typically, a prophecy like this only adds some slight but predictable tension to the story, since the Chosen One doesn't actually ruin the world. So Shulk causing the destruction of not only the High Entia, but the entire Bionis is a neat, twisted subversion of the prophecy cliché. Kallian talks with Melia in private about how she is to be the next Empress, which acts as a simple but effective setup for Melia in Future Connected. The final part of this scene is between Lorithia and Melia, but since we already know that Lorithia has malevolent intentions, this scene feels a bit too cartoonish for my liking. The story cuts back to Shulk, where they discuss their predicament and surmise that maybe Melia is involved in their imprisonment. Shulk denies this though, which acts as a way to show the deep connection he has with her because he's begun to trust her, despite pessimism being one of his core personality traits. Afterward, Alvis is revealed to be the Divine Seer, and it adds more mystery to his character because the last time we saw him was in Makna Forest, far from Alkamoth where he was supposed to be. After he leaves, an Imperial soldier barges in to proclaim that they've lost contact with a transporter, requiring you to complete a filler quest in order to continue the story. It's a boring and unnecessary story quest, and I think it's only there as an excuse to give you some freedom to do something else before the story escalates to a point where you can't go wherever you please. But I still think there were better ways to implement this than a superfluous story quest. Allowing you to travel to any landmark with your entire party after a story cutscene is a better alternative for this, and it would even allow players to either continue the story or explore some more if they so desire. The scene that occurs during the pointless quest, though, gives us a glimpse of Alvis's foresight. He tells Saurian that he can't quite see the fate of the Bionis, but that there is still hope for the Bionis with Shulk and Melia, which is a complete lie, and we'll see that once Alvis's allegiance is tested. But said lie causes Yumea, Saurian, and Kallian to seek the people's approval for Melia. Yumea, in all her evilly evil plans, proposes the trial of the tomb, which the other two exposit how the trial is completely dangerous. Melia agrees to the trial, and then we get a preview of the masterfully malevolent Yumea's most malicious meditations, and it's so unnecessary. There was already a scene where she conveys her distaste for Melia, so it adds nothing to her character. The party, finishing up their pointless time-wasting quest, decides to head back to the capital because, ooh, Riki tired! Wow, what an excellent way to make the quest relevant to the plot. Once they all get back, the Crown Princess ceremony begins, featuring the abhorrent 2D image crowds that I even disliked on the Wii version when I first played it. But after that, the game finally gives us the reveal that Melia is of royalty after all of the explicit, obvious hints. So I'm just glad it's all over now. After the ceremony, Shulk foresees Melia's death in the tomb. Then, Yumea has a conversation with Tyrea, revealing that her hatred for Melia is because of her mixed heritage. This scene, in contrast to the one in the audience chamber, is necessary because it reveals more about her motivations, and it involves everyone's favorite cliché: fantasy racism. I don't think it's a bad inclusion for her character, but the cliché occurs so often that I usually question how effective or necessary a racism plotline is. My biggest problem is that when implemented, the idea is between two races that really aren't that different. Or in a worst case scenario, fantasy racism can become white person here hates white person there. Thankfully, Xenoblade implements fantasy racism between races that have actually different physical attributes, though I think there will be a better version of this in future Connected. During Yumea's racism monologue, she includes some world building about who or what the first and second consort are. And it's essentially a system that has a Homs partner and a High Entia partner for the ruler to... frick. Yeah. I think the world building fits well within the monologue, so I don't have a problem with it here. However, Callian overhears this conversation and he'll inform other people about it later. We return back to Shulk and company in their cell, or something, where there's another mystery about Melia's lineage. Except I prefer it here since it's not meant to be a plot twist. It's something that we, as the audience, already know. So it's a neat way to display the characters deducing some answers of what we're already privy to. Shulk interrupts the conversation to mention that he saw a vision with Melia in the tomb before being interrupted by some Bionite Order assassins. While the cutscenes never state this, the Monado is ineffective against these assassins, since they're humanoid beings from Bionis. So it's yet another instance of the combat linking itself to the story. Once the assassins are defeated, Alvis arrives, followed by Callian and some soldiers. Alvis ascertains that the assassins were inquisitors of the Bionite Order, and then he continues expositing more information about the group, which I think is integrated fine because the Order is considered a myth. Shulk bursts out that Melia is in danger to Callian right before cutting to Melia entering the tomb. Here the game implements some tension-heightening dramatic irony as Lorthia playfully provides some tips to Melia. The story returns to the party at Alcamoth and Callian denies them entry into the tomb. But Dunban, the sly, witty man that he is, finds a loophole in the fact that the rules only apply to High Entia. Callian inquires more about Dunban's identity, revealing that the High Entia as a people are prideful and refuse to get involved with the other races on Bionis, which is an important detail because it's how Callian evolves as a character. Once the party arrives at the tomb's entrance, Shulk asks Alvis about his ability to see the future. He avoids the question mostly, hinting at his strange origin as an AI. But the interesting part here is his explanation for the Monado, because he states that the Monado is an instrument that can be used to control the particles of ether around it, which will become incredibly significant near the end of the video, so keep it in mind. Alvis finishes his speech with a vague line about the reawakening of the Bionis, and the party descends into the High Entia tomb. After Melia enters the tomb successfully, the party arrives at the verification device. Reyn, being resorted to comic relief haha stupid character, presses a button, causing the party to fall down into the depths of the tomb. While I hate to admit that I actually found this scene funny, reducing Reyn to a stupid character is an oversimplification of his personality, and I don't think it services the story enough to warrant this slight change in personality. The next scene is when Melia arrives at the end of the tomb. She meets a digital recreation of her ancestor who's delighted that the Homs DNA integration has worked so well, which acts as a small and well-hidden hint about how Telethia are born from High Entia. Tyrea interrupts Melia, asserting that half Homs High Entia are not worthy to rule. The story returns to the main party, featuring some small but neat character banter between them all, and each of them comment on Reyn's stupidity from moments ago. The cutscene caps off with Shulk Somber's reply.
Melia needs us.
The dialogue furthers the deep connection and trust that Shulk has with Melia because of his serious attitude during the scene. And Shulk's seriousness is reinforced by the preceding scene once the party defeats the Orluga guard. Whether or not the connection is mutually romantic, though, is entirely up to interpretation. Finishing off the tomb's guard now brings us to the reunion between Melia and the rest of the party, just in time to hear Tyrea shout about Melia being half Homs, swiftly wrapping up any confusion about Melia's identity. I appreciate the half Homs revelation for the party here because it's a quick plotline that ensures everyone in the party knows the same information that we do about Melia without having a long, drawn-out mystery that's frustrating and predictable. After the fight with Tyrea and the mystery Telethia, Alphys prevents the Telethia from destroying itself with some unexplained magic. Tyrea escapes and the team all have a joyous reunion featuring a heartfelt moment between Riki and Melia, preceded by a joking interaction between the hero pawn and Rein. All of this is great. I love seeing these characters brimming with distinct personalities just interacting with each other. It adds more to their emotional connection, fleshing out their characters and personalities through heartfelt moments like these. And after that short but wonderful scene, we return back to Alcamoth. Melia's return to the audience chamber informs us that Saurian now knows of the Bionite Order, the first consort is under investigation, and Melia is accepted as the next ruler of Alcamoth. Shulk is invited to the audience chamber to chat with Saurian afterward. There, the two discuss the prophecy of the Bionis' reawakening further, and it brings into question some of the validity of Shulk's quest for revenge, because satisfying his thirst for vengeance could lead to total extinction, and well, it technically does. Which I think is so creative because most narratives would shy away from filling a twisted prophecy like this one. At the end, Saurian exhibits more of his paternal qualities, asking Shulk to be Melia's friend. I think Saurian should have had more moments depicting him as a father figure, but what we have isn't terrible either. We cut to a dark room that features a mysterious, new-faced Mechon that we haven't seen before. This is Yaldabaoth, as we'll know later, but right now the scene introduces a new, unknown spear that will soon become important. A flashback precedes the scene with Shulk and Saurian, adding more tension to Saurian's decisions because he foresees his own death. It's such a compelling instance where foreshadowing can still create tension, because this is the first time that a character death is linked to a vision that Shulk wants to come true, ensuring that the foresight mechanic is still fresh and unique in its own story. Following the flashback, the investiture ceremony occurs. The most significant thing of note here is Shulk's line at the end.
No, it's not like that. They're one and the same girl.
It acts as a turning point for Shulk and Melia's relationship, since it's him accepting Melia's personality in its totality, which helps so that Melia's romantic feelings for Shulk aren't out of place. Afterward, Alphys and Lorithia have a private conversation, alluding to the fulfillment of Zanz's divine plans. It adds some more mystery to the two of them without revealing too much about their allegiances. The next scene graces us with the wonderful voice of Metalface, displaying his more aggressive, hostile tendencies with his jealousy toward Face Nemesis. The line here,
"Let's settle this, machine to machine,"
acts as a nice bit of misdirection since it reinforces Metalface's lack of humanity, diverting attention away from his real identity. The game cuts back to the party, who all bicker about waiting for Saurian to decide whether or not they can visit Prison Island. But Riki shows his more caring side when he suggests that they visit Melia. Visiting Melia leads to some great chemistry on display, as exemplified by the banter between Sharla, Dunban, and Rein about the dinner banquet. And after some more fitting explanations to the mask, Melia's heritage, etc., Shulk has another vision: Saurian's death. The story cuts to Metalface destroying a legion of anti-Mechon defense mechanisms, characterizing him as still dreadful and quite powerful. Once we return back to the party, Melia and everyone else decide to rush to Prison Island in order to prevent Saurian's death. The party then arrives at the audience chamber once again to Callian, assuring them that Saurian's death is destiny, and that it cannot be avoided. But Dunban, with his in-character obstinance, asserts that they should defy destiny and save Melia's father. Before they can go to Prison Island, they have to activate 2 seals, which has always been weird to me, because if the 2 seals need to be activated, why didn't Saurian have to activate them beforehand? I don't know. It's a small inconsistency that I think is mostly there as a gameplay moment more than anything, but the error is still bothersome to me. Once the forced-in gameplay requirements are done, the party finishes off Alaya, revealed to be an ancient creature who's guarding something on Prison Island, and they all use the transporter to finally visit the fated place. This section is where some of the most interesting story moments start to surface, and it also boasts one of the biggest and best reveals the game has. The first scene involves Saurian unlocking what was sealed on Prison Island, a giant. It's a strange reveal that receives more explanation later, and I think the added uncertainty about the sealed giant is great. Saurian then proceeds to activate some type of seal, casting a shield that protects Prison Island and prevents any Mechon from entering. We'll also learn later that the giant is the one who powers this shield because his death stops the shield from functioning. The preceding cutscene fleshes out more of the lore behind the island in a natural way while also hinting at the truth behind the High Entia race. As for the lore, it fits well in the conversation due to Riki and Ryan's comments about the statues, so Melia having a serious tone to these nonchalant comments is fitting for her character. The hint behind the High Entia occurs when Riki says that the statues, who are representative of the High Entia ancestors, look like dino beasts, aka Telethia. The party enters the teleporter, transporting them to the top of the tower. Once at the top, the party meets the giant who was sealed away. The most curious thing about him is his plethora of knowledge regarding the Monado and also its current wielder, Shulk. He includes more confirmation about what's been said toward the Monado, reinforcing that it controls ether, and its shape is formed by the will of its wielder. He says that he knows everything about those who wield the Monado, but a lack of trust is introduced to his character right at the start when he curiously knows that Melia is to be the next ruler of the High Entia, a fact which he shouldn't know based on what he's told the party. But it's such a small, insignificant line that I consider it hidden enough to be a commendable decision on the writer's behalf. But moving along, Zanza gives some more hints about the truth of Phased Mechon because the constraint he refers to is the idea that the sword can't cut humans. Since it's an explicit clue that's so close to the actual reveal, I think it works. Plus, I remember that when I first got to this part, I thought that the Mechon were using Hom's blood, and that's why the Monado couldn't cut through Phased Mechon. So there is still room for more questions and possibilities even after this really explicit clue. Anyway, we cut to Metalface and the Mechon army trying to break through the shield on Prison Island. Metalface figures out where it's coming from, so he breaks out the new toy that he has. The story returns to the top of Prison Island when Zanza asks Shulk to free him, which will release the Monado shackles. He says one strange line here.
Nothing but a god can stand in your way.
Which is such an explicit hint at the final major plot line for the game that I'm surprised I never noticed this until my second playthrough. I think the line is fantastic though because it's still hidden while establishing the existence of the final major arc for this game's story. Melia is more skeptical of Zanza's intentions, and rightfully so. The rest of the party disagrees with her, and I think it's a great way to hint at Zanza's malicious intentions even more. Then Shulk agrees to set Zanza free because his desire for revenge is too great. And one excellent touch to the story is that this choice, fueled by revenge, will ultimately become Shulk's downfall. Once Zanza is freed, a blinding light surrounds him as he unlocks the Monado's powers.
Let the shackles be released!
But seemingly before Zanza can release the Monado, Metalface fires the new spear at Zanza and destroys his body. Face Nemesis shows up too, and the new face communicates with Zanza telepathically, which to me is kind of awkward because this character is the only person shown to be capable of telepathy. And Zanza, who is later revealed to have godly powers, should most likely know who's communicating with him. It's not a major plot hole or anything like that, but it just confuses me because Zanza seems to be omnipotent, or at least omniscient. But Shulk interrupts the slightly weird conversation by attempting to attack Face Nemesis. Face Nemesis pleads for Shulk to stop attacking, but the scene successfully depicts Shulk's anger consuming him and attacking the Mechon senselessly. The following fight scene with the rest of the party conveys how connected they are because of shots like the cut from Dunban to Rhine. During the fight, Metalface has a chat with Dunban, heavily hinting at his past as a Homs, which I think is fine since the mystery behind his identity doesn't continue long after this moment. Dunban also has a similar realization that some players might have too, and I think it works despite how explicit the hint is. After Face Nemesis prevents any further confrontation, Soria protects Melia and embraces her, giving him one final moment of paternal love, which is good to have more of. And after Metalface lunges toward him, he pushes away Melia to protect her, revealing Metalface's crimson-covered claws. Shulk hears Zanza's voice though, and learns to control the Monado even further, unlocking the Monado too. The kanji that appears when unlocking the Monado is Hito, meaning person in Japanese, which cements even further that humans are inside Phased Mechon units right before its reveal. After the fight, Shulk's initial vision comes to fruition. Face Nemesis swoops in to block Shulk's blow, revealing that Fiora is alive. This scene is so emotionally resonant, and it's one of the best parts of the game. The music here is the second and final appearance of the main theme. I explain the significance of this more in the music section, but for now, it creates a heightened emotional significance. And the petrified faces of Dunban and Shulk also emphasize the emotional height of the story here. Shulk's final screams of desperation also drive this home and cap off the sublime scene. Soren's death is a bit underwhelming, but it provides a more emotional core to Melia, so I still think it's decent. The aftermath shows Alvis arriving where Zanza's body once was, enforcing his mysterious aura and foreshadowing Alvis's true allegiances without revealing too much. The slow pacing for the beginning of this section is a welcome addition, especially after the previously plot-heavy section. It allows for some breathing room in the narrative and for the characters to develop emotionally some more. The first scene here acts as world building for the political system of Alcamoth, while also naturally sneaking in details about what's to come. Melia will not be ruler for a year, Callian will be emperor in her stead, and the capital is planning an assault on Mechonis. The next scene depicts the party in a state of disarray. The dialogue here between the entire party is absolutely superb. It brings us up to speed with how the characters feel in a natural, believable way, like in Sharla's summary here.
Dunban's locked himself away ever since we came back.
Taking that same line Sharla said, it also doesn't directly state any emotion for Dunban because it can imply several emotions. Frustration, sadness, confusion, etc. And the use of implications is so necessary in writing because explicit, direct statements like, Dunban is sad, are boring and disrespectful to an audience because it assumes that the viewers aren't capable enough to understand implications or hidden truths. On top of the already great implied dialogue though, the cutscene presents further romantic chemistry between Melia and Shulk, or at least for Melia when she inquires about Fiora. And that same line leads into an explanation about Fiora, bringing Melia up to speed on everything, which also springboards into Reyn revealing the frustration and confusion he also feels. It's a sublime culmination of emotions and character drama that it's the best part this story has to offer. Before Shulk leaves to find Dunban, he talks to himself, providing an explanation of why he's visiting Dunban. The later half of the game has these kinds of scenes a little too frequently for me, but it does help the narrative and walking segments feel more connected, so I appreciate that a lot. When Shulk finally arrives, he and Dunban have a conversation that reverses what I at least thought would happen, Shulk helping Dunban. But being in line with Dunban's character, he helps Shulk through his emotional turmoil instead. It also marks the moment where Dunban explicitly reveals the romantic feelings Fiora held for Shulk. It fits perfectly here, and the progression of Shulk calming down is natural and not ham-fisted. When the two return to the rest of the party, Callian summons them all in the audience chamber. There, he apologizes for the past actions of the High Entia and proposes an assault on Mechonis with Shulk as the ambassador. He leaves and contemplates the decision when the other party members, except Riki, all give their own comments on how they can help Shulk. The first line, Reyn says,
It's Fiora. That's why you're hesitating.
Would usually annoy me since it explains Shulk's feelings in an unnatural manner. But because Reyn is his best friend, being perceptive and understanding about Shulk's emotions is still within the bounds of his personality. Melia proposes that she should stay behind instead while Shulk and everyone else search for Fiora. On their way out of Alcamoth, Sharla chats with Melia about her feelings towards Shulk, and there are some implications in this scene, and the prior one, that the feelings might be mutual, such as when Sharla explicitly talks about Shulk's own feelings toward Melia. But then a somewhat strange scene happens. A Melia stand-in appears so that the real Melia can join the party for the rest of the game. It's a scene that I don't really like because it doesn't feel fitting to the actual narrative, and it exists as an excuse for Melia to travel with the party. It's not terrible, but it's still a grievance I have all this time later. It isn't as strange as Riki though, because she does have a desire for vengeance, like the other party members. Callian reports, however, that the faced Mechon fled to Galahad Fortress, so Alvis accompanies the party on a transport to Magna Forest, leading them all to the entrance of Valak Mountain. Before the party enters the cold climate, we're treated to another scene with Face Nemesis. It subtly hints at several future events too, which this game always excels at. Face Nemesis's feelings for Shulk provide a clue for Fiora's return, and when she gestures to the item on her chest, it's during this line.
Besides, the Monado will draw him to me.
On a first playthrough, this only refers to Shulk's Monado, but it can also act as a reference to her own Monado, which is a reveal that happens much later. Afterward, Alvis tells the party to head toward Asse Tower, and once they do so, they melt the ice and walk inside. Shulk begins to remember his history with this place somewhat when they all arrive inside, but Alvis takes him aside and tells him more, helping Shulk remember that this is where he was found by the expedition team. It also provides some well-fitted explanations about Alvis's foresight, and also how the future can even be predicted in this universe. Since it's such a strange concept, I think the explanations several times are warranted, and each explanation of the power adds on something, so it's never boring, repeated dialogue. After the group leaves Asse Tower, they find Face Nemesis, and the person who's inhabiting Fiora's body appears to be understanding and peaceful, right before being interrupted by Metalface. The presence of his English VA is always a blessing, but the reveal about Metalface's pilot causes some great character drama here. Metalface is Mumkar, and I'm glad the game still doesn't dwell on the mystery after the very explicit clue toward his identity on Prison Island. It ensures that the story's pacing is fluid and just fast enough not to be rushed. When he takes the Monado, the whole party is enraged, but the scene as a whole chooses to have a fitting focus on Dunban's relationship with Mumkar. It also has some more subtle lines about Mumkar's motives here.
I can't tell you how badly I wanted this sword.
But when Dunban attempts to attack, Mumkar remotely controls the face unit, but Melia shoots an ether blast secretly in order to knock the Monado out of his hands. It's a part that I appreciate since it displays the writers' care for a logical story without the dreaded P word I've said so many times before in this video. Once the player finishes the combat challenge though, the game delivers an excellent fight scene that elevates the character drama between Dunban and Mumkar even further. The conversation during the battle is natural since Dunban is rightfully confused and enraged by what Mumkar has done. Their conversation provides more about Mumkar's motivations, which boil down to a desire for power and hatred for Dunban, which I think aren't bad motivations since they fit with his cowardly personality on display in the prologue. Dunban's anger comes out in one of the final lines between the two of them.
Never. I will strike you down and all that you have become, you wretched fool. The Monado will stop you, and then you will know the shame of all that you have done, traitor!
This fits so well with the pre-established narrative surrounding revenge and hate that I'm impressed how the writers are constantly developing the idea instead of repeating the same message or even just discarding it entirely. Yaldabaoth appears shortly thereafter, revealing himself as the leader of Mechonis and taking away Fiora. In the aftermath, Shulk is worried again about the state of Fiora, but Reyn, being the supportive character he is, encourages Shulk again, and so the party all head to Sword Valley.